week in a row I had to do. I think I went like a year and did. Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we will be checking in on the big stories of the week, but first, it's summertime, and the highways and byways of the state of Pennsylvania are filled with travelers. We're going to now, at this point, check in with our transportation expert. We'll get to that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Bob Latham joins me. He's the Executive Vice President of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. Those folks that he represents are doing what at the moment as we speak,
right? We are fixing roads and bridges throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Terry, it's good to be with you this morning, and as always, we represent those private companies that build roads and fix roads, but right now mainly fixing them in Pennsylvania because that's what we need to do.
So how does that stand? We got this big infusion of cash. What was that, about 4 years ago?
2013,
now?
So it's been 4 years now. And what that did was it really stabilized the transportation fund in Pennsylvania. So we were headed downward in our funding. Roads were wearing out. Our bad bridge inventory was going up, and now we're able to stabilize that with that funding. It's really kind of kept it level at this point.
But here's the other point I like to make. I mean, I travel a lot, and you see the crews out doing the work, and that's great. And I sit back when I'm driving and say, now, understand, they're improving these roads. You may get held up a little bit. We all have to show some patience because it's important work. But it looks like there's still so much more that needs to be done because of decades of neglect, or am I wrong about that?
Well, there's several things working against Pennsylvania. First of all, our geology, our geography, our weather patterns. We have the freeze-thaw that plays heck with asphalt and concrete, so it always has to be, a paving job has hopefully a 10 to 20 year life cycle on it. Increasing traffic patterns. We look in the central Pennsylvania area. We're now working on Interstate 81, trying to make that more safe, particularly in the Carlisle area. This is something that we're able to do as a result of the funding, is try to add additional lanes and do some more safety improvements there, reduce accidents, hopefully reduce fatalities and that sort of thing. And you see those kind of projects going on all over the state.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I guess my question is, at some point we're likely to need an infusion of new dollars. As I put it, it's not just a question. There are two big points here. One is it's about the economy. It's about whether businesses will settle here, put plants up, put factories up, come here and put plants up. It's also about safety, for gosh sakes. Can you find anything more important than a modern infrastructure? Are we going to need more cash to do this?
Well, absolutely. I mean, again, the point is what we're able to do with the state funding bill we passed several years ago is to do these fixes, hopefully, and make some safety improvements, and that'll work out very well. However, to do any kind of major new capacity, new facilities, whether it be highways or whether it be public transit or other infrastructure investments, we're going to need additional monies. Now, there's been a lot of talk in Washington about a federal infrastructure push. The president has talked about that, and we'll see where that goes. But right now, we're really focused on fixing the existing, what we call inventory of roads.
Right, and that's of the 4 or 5 big things the state does. I don't know why that wouldn't be on the top
we had
top of the list.
We had a former state senator that said everybody touches the roads.
You got it. You're right.
One state service.
Yeah, we're going to come back to this federal. The president wants to do $1 trillion in infrastructure. I want to talk about that in the next segment. But the other aspect of this is the diversion of money. It's a game that gets played here. It's because they want to balance the budget or they have other needs about taking money that's approved by the legislature for one thing and diverting it to another. In this case,
the transportation, the highway fund, known as the motor license fund, is one of several pots of money, I guess, if you will, that were dedicated for a certain purpose, and because of the general fund deficit, and I guess in some cases a non-willingness to raise across-the-board taxes. The legislature has gone into these various pots of money and taken it, and that happened with the motor license fund under the guise of funding the state police. The governor, to his credit, opened up this debate even further this year by proposing a $25 per person head tax on those municipalities that are simply relying on the state police and not paying for their own police forces. And there's a great debate going on right now in the legislature over that. But the point is, what the governor has done what Governor Wolf has done by doing this is shine a light on the fact that we're moving some $800 million a year out of the highway fund over to the general fund to pay for the state police. So the question is, how much road tax money, how much of your gas tax should be going to pay for police as opposed to fixing roads?
The original purpose was to fix the roads, and no one's going to argue that the state police shouldn't be well funded. It's the question of, I think you would agree, we want them well funded, but it's how they get funded that matters, right?
Well, you look at it, you can look at it very simply in that about 25% of the gas tax that people pay are now not going on the roads because of this diversion of money. Now, the state police need to be funded. Obviously, they are a vital part of this Commonwealth. However, the question is, do you take out of this pot and put it over there?
Yep. All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Bob get into some detail about President Trump wants to spend $1 trillion. It's called infrastructure. There's a debate over whether it should be done more by the private sector, by the by the government itself. We'll get into all of that and a number of other topics after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, I'm chatting with Bob Latham. He's the Executive VP of the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. He's certainly one of the state's leading experts on all things transportation, roads, bridges. And in addition to the state situation, which we've just talked about, there's a big debate going on in Washington about a federal infrastructure plan. As you know, as I think many of our viewers know, President Trump wants to spend $1 trillion. It's fairly aspects of it are certainly controversial. So what's your take on that?
I'm glad you brought it up because it's something that's been in the news and everybody says, oh, well, you're going to have all this money and this is going to be wonderful. First of all, we think it's great that the president is very much interested in infrastructure. I think he's one of the first presidents, I guess, if you will, that's really recognized that we need to spend more. But his idea on infrastructure isn't just roads. It's airports. Port facilities, power grid, and all that. And that's fine because we need all that, particularly on, water and other types of things. But back to the highway situation, one thing when we talk about what we're able to do with at the state level and what contractors are able to do fixing roads and bridges, about 40 to 50% of that money still comes from the federal highway trust fund. And there is a federal gas tax that's about 18 cents per gallon that goes into that and then is distributed back to the state. So that's very, very important for our funding, and that keeps things fairly stable. What happens, though, is Congress keeps bumping that along, and then it goes away after 5 years, and they just kind of, so we call it kick the can down the road. So the president has come out, he announced he had his infrastructure week a couple weeks ago, mainly talking about privatizing air traffic controllers and then working on moving projects along more quickly in the permit review and all that sort of thing. There's no plan on funding.
But they keep it's bipartisan. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, they're right. It is bipartisan, and that's a good thing. It's always been that way in transportation, I think. The call is for private investment. And what people don't need to understand is that private investment in transportation is another form of borrowing. And that's okay. I mean, in some cases, you can go to private industry or to Wall Street and get money up front and move projects forward that you couldn't do before. But at the end of the day, you're still paying that back. It's kind of like, you know, when you go to the bank and borrow $200,000 to buy a house, you know, and they have that little form at settlement that says you're going to pay $375,000 for this $200,000 house.
Yeah, over
well, you
time,
get the house
right.
now,
yeah,
but you're still
you,
financing it.
Yeah,
So it's really a financing mechanism. What we're saying is what we also need coupled with that, because there is a role for private financing in it, but it's not the be-all and end-all. You still have to look at the kind of things we did with Act 89 here in Pennsylvania, and that is at the federal level, either increase the gas tax or find some other funding mechanism that'll stabilize that highway trust fund for long-term, and then you can apply that private financing in appropriate instances, appropriate projects.
The same thing applies that we were just talking about. I mean, I travel a good bit. I'm in airports. I mean, some of them you can't believe the condition that they're in. And if we don't update and modernize this, how can we have an economy that can compete not just in our own country but around the world? The same with ports and harbors. And
those facilities are prime for private investment, because what happens is they have a revenue stream that can come back and pay off that financing mechanism. LaGuardia in New York is being completely renovated as a public-private partnership, and that's because they have passenger charges and other fees that will be able to pay back that private financing. So in that instance, it's a good thing, and it's very, very doable. But if you don't have that type of a scheme with the project, then you're simply drawing from existing revenues that you get in order to pay back the borrowing. So it's a dicey thing.
It would seem to me that this is a situation where, you know, this would be bipartisan now, and actually the president might have more trouble with some of the conservatives in his own in the conferences in Congress, the Republican conferences. On the other hand, you would think that because it would involve, you know, a lot of job creation, and that job creation would be in the private sector, notwithstanding how it's financed, I think you would agree with that. It would be a mix of things, that would be very healthy for the economy.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the president's behind it. Now, we have a couple things going for us in Pennsylvania politically, or a couple of people, I should say. The chairman of the House Infrastructure Committee, Bill Schuster, has been very much involved in trying to push this along. So we're very happy to have him working on it. Lou Barletta is a member of the committee and has been a longtime supporter of this and one of the early supporters of the president. So we have sort of a line to the White House, and then also we have the House leadership. So hopefully we'll be able to see some positive things out of that. Unfortunately, you know, it's kind of stalled behind everything that's stalled in Washington. So
I'll say
maybe in the fall.
Healthcare and tax reform, right? They're in line. You're third.
Yeah, we're
transportation.
Third. We're always third.
You're always third. Well, look, you come back and give us another update soon, and we'll check in on what you're doing. All right, coming up, you want to stay with us for Big Stories of the Week.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to the program, Big Stories of the Week. Of course, we have to talk about the failure to fund this year's fiscal budget in the state of Pennsylvania, but we got a couple of other big stories. We have two reporters here who are going to talk about those big stories. Katie Meyer, she's a Capitol Bureau Chief with WITF and works also as a journalist for Pennsylvania Public Radio. Robert Swift with Capitolwire. All right, Robert, I'm going to start with you. they're going to spend billions of dollars, $32 billion if I got the number correct, and there's still no agreement on how to pay for it, and we're into this fiscal year. How are they going to pay for it? What are they talking about?
This has become the new norm where they split up the what used to be the budget. And it used to be that until a few years ago, when you passed the budget, you had the what's called the fiscal bills with it, and the tax bills, so that you had the revenue in place to support the spending, the $32 billion. And now, the last couple of years, they've just done the budget to spending bill, and we'll figure out the revenue part later. So they, we did this by the June 30th deadline, and they go off for the 4th. And then you expect them to come back on the 5th, and it doesn't necessarily happen that way. It hasn't happened so far that they can't agree on how
Now, as
to
we
spend
tape this program, they're expected to come back this weekend to begin to work on the funding, right? And we'll see.
We'll see.
So let's go through 3 or 4 ways they propose to pay for it. Not in any great detail, but how are they going to pay for $32 billion?
Sure. So one of the big ones this year, and this is a fairly new idea, it hasn't been popular in the past, is borrowing. We've got a $1.5 billion shortfall.
At least.
Yeah. And that's from last year. And that's a combination of, tax shortfalls and overspending. And so that more than likely is going to be filled up by borrowing, probably borrowing against future revenue from some state fund.
Perhaps the tobacco settlement money.
Yeah, tobacco settlement money. And so,
where's that supposed to go? Healthcare, and it's not going to go to healthcare? Is that right?
Yes. So it's been going primarily to healthcare-related expenses. Other states also have this tobacco settlement money and haven't been so strict about putting it into healthcare-related things. A lot of people like the fact that Pennsylvania has done that. So that's going to be controversial if, in fact, we find out that that's what they're going to be doing, but we haven't found out yet. So that's one thing, the borrowing, and that's very likely to happen at this point. The other big thing is gaming. And again, that's sort of, there's different projections from how much revenue they can get from that, but it also depends on how large this expansion is, expanded gaming. And that's really where a lot of the issue comes up, is because there's conflict between the House and the Senate over whether to legalize video gaming terminals in parts and cabinets.
Robert, you wrote an interesting piece for Capitolwire. Was it last week?
Yes.
You all write so much, I can't remember when you write what you write. We're talking at one point, as Katie, they're going to do these video terminals, gaming terminals, VGTs. 44,000 of them, is that real?
That's what the House wants. Now, whether they could compromise a lower figure, once again, we were into, this gets down to interest groups. We have the established casino industry and the lawmakers representing the casinos, afraid of competition. We have the areas that don't have casinos, don't get local money from them. We have the bar and tavern owners who have felt over the past maybe 20 years that they've been losing out economically. So we have all that kind of interest at play, which makes it harder to get compromise in this sort of thing and figure out and also we have this idea that 40,000 of these video gaming terminals, at what point you start, hampering the lottery, the Pennsylvania lottery, which funds the citizens program.
I made the argument that there's only so much gambling you can do. Revenues you can derive from it. Plus, you create other kinds of problems with gaming addiction. And the other big aspect of it is to expand alcohol sales and revenue from there. You go ahead, take it.
Yeah, the House has been in favor of full-on privatization. House Speaker Mike Turzai has been a big proponent of that. They have passed bills to do so. The Senate's been more lukewarm on that. That's something we haven't heard quite as much about. We've heard different permutations of different taxes. One of the proposals that came up, and I don't know how far this would go, but was doing an individual tax on drinks sold in bars instead of a wholesale tax at the proprietor level. Wouldn't that be great? A drink tax, exactly.
All right.
So that's one thing.
Yeah. We're going to run to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Wolf will not turn over the voting records to the federal commission that's supposed to see, how much, if we had corruption and how much of that took place in American voting. And then Katie attended a Pat Toomey. What do I call that? A call-in, a meet-in? We'll come back and do all of that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, advancing quality, improving lives.
Welcome back. Well, we're talking with a couple of journalists about the big stories of the week. I'm going to start with this. Governor Wolf said what this week?
Basically, it was on last Friday afternoon when people weren't noticing. He said that Pennsylvania would not turn over records, voter registration information to a commission that President Trump formed to supposedly investigate voter fraud. He's one of most states have refused to do so, or saying that the request would turn over too much personal information, and some states would turn over a limited amount, but we've made it quite clear that Pennsylvania is not going to participate in it.
And by the way, there's some Republican governors who are not cooperating as well. All right, your big story. What did Senator Toomey was around in this area this past week, and what was he around for?
Yes, last night, actually. He was around for what was called a town hall at ABC 27, and so Toomey did this. It was a town hall in which people were chosen to ask questions. Mm-hmm. It was sort of a limited pool of constituents. And we should say some people were angry that there wasn't more accessibility, that it wasn't like a live in-person town hall. Bob Casey did the same thing a week or two ago.
Yeah. And by the way, he came on the Franklin and Marshall College campus. They asked to come on, and it was open to the public, so I guess he's done both kinds, right?
Yeah.
So continue.
So healthcare was the big thing that came up at this. The Senate Republicans tried to repeal and replace of Obamacare. Toomey was a co-author on that.
Right.
And so he was fielding a lot of questions and really defending the plan, and there were lots of protesters outside. People were very upset. Really about his claims that the new plan wouldn't cause too much of a service disruption for people who weren't on the expansion. So, there were some interesting things. He, I think, notably contested the CBO's scoring of that plan, saying that there was someone who was partisan on the board. That's sort of, I think, a controversial claim to try to make.
Well, I'm going to take the final word on this. It seems to me that they would have town halls open to the public if organized demonstrations did not enter the hall where the member of Congress was going to speak, and they ended up doing what? Shouting and screaming, so you couldn't even have the town hall. I mean, express your point of view. If you want to be different, that's fine. If you want to take on somebody, that's great. But can't you be a little respectful? The host never gets the final word. It's usually one of you journalists, but I just took it there. All right. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.